This is ZEISS Presents Full Exposure, the weekly resource for news, trends, and the people who influence the world of photography and cinematography. Hosted by veteran photographer and filmmaker Jim Camp.
Rory Doyle is the winner of the 2019 ZEISS Photography Award. A native of Maine, Rory moved to the Delta town of Cleveland, Mississippi to teach when he happened on a sight that struck him: African-American cowboys on horseback. He went on to gain the trust of locals and began work on his photo story, The Delta Hill Riders. The essay has also earned Rory recognition with the Smithsonian Photo Contest Grand Prize, as well as gallery exhibitions worldwide.
I studied to be a writer. I studied journalism at St. Michael's College in Colchester, Vermont. And the whole curriculum was writing articles, but it was the last semester of senior year where I took Professor Jerry Swope's Photo J 101. And immediately I knew that was the way I wanted to share stories. And from there, of course, with just one course, I had a ton to learn, and so I picked up a camera and just kept shooting, kept practicing, kept going with it. And a few years of that before I finally started to get assignments. And that was confirmation for me that, while the training as a writer was extremely valuable, my preference was stories from immediately after taking that class. With just one course under my belt, I knew that I wasn't ready yet to be hired right away, and so I actually ended up in Mississippi. My wife and I moved there when I got a graduate assistantship to teach in the school district in Cleveland, Mississippi through a master's program at Delta State University. And so for 2 years I was in the school district teaching, again on the side working to become a better photographer. And we ended up falling in love. I mean, it's a really unique place that's full of stories and full of culture that obviously is foreign to a Mainer like myself, and Mexico is where my wife grew up. So we were in a place that was really intriguing for both of us. And then as a passionate young photographer, I mean, there was endless things for me to photograph and people to meet, and it was a perfect learning environment.
Yeah, I think for anybody to go to a new place, it just immediately broadens your horizons.
Absolutely. I mean, I think back on when we moved there, people are like, why are you coming to Mississippi? You're from Maine. Like, why here? There's nothing to do. And I immediately knew, there's tons to do here. There's tons to photograph, and there's so much history and culture and stories to share that you might not realize if you had grown up there. It's funny, I guess right now people know me as the cowboy guy, but it really all began quite randomly. If you know about Mississippi or know about the stories that Mississippi gets covered a lot, you see bad education, poverty, racism, or maybe a more positive story, farming, which is the lifeblood of where I live. I cannot leave out the bluesmen, so everybody also knows the history of like Mississippi bluesmen. And so these are like reoccurring projects that you see a lot. And I guess, even from my training in journalism, I wanted to do something that was different. Like, I didn't want to overdo the same story again and again, and randomly saw, or I guess just paid attention to the fact that there were African-American cowboys and cowgirls riding at the end of a Christmas parade that happens in our town every year. And immediately, I being a Mainer and being in a place so far from home, it was like the first time that I really conceptualized, okay, there's a big diversity to cowboy culture in this country. And of course, the Mississippi Delta is very diverse to begin with. It's actually a majority African-American place. And I quickly learned, just by going up to them in the middle of the parade and approaching them in a short period of time, I realized how in-depth this community was.
Well, plus, I mean, not being African-American, did you feel like you might be sort of like a bit of an outsider and might be tough to be accepted?
Yeah, that's of course an issue, particularly in Mississippi, where the history of segregation and civil rights history that Mississippi has. I was very sensitive to that from the beginning, whether or not this was my place to be telling the story. But in race was never an issue for anyone when I first started the project, and the confirmation to keep going came very quickly when I was receiving invitations to come to photograph personal things going on in their life, as well as all the aspects of this cowboy horse riding culture. The connection is so deep, and because I live there, it's, you know, we know where each other lives, and it's not like I'm there on a run and gun assignment. And so I've really been able to connect with them, and aside from the body of work, that's really special to me. Like, no matter what happens to the photos, this is a point in my life, but also a point in America where, like, there's so much division. And I found a way to connect with a community that's obviously different looking from me, but in the end, we all share a passion about sharing their stories of cowboy culture and horse riding.
So what was it like, how did you start on, you know, I mean, you saw them, just a visually striking paradox, you know, for, like you say, the archetypical vision of, you know, like John Wayne and white cowboys. So how did you start in delving into what you were going to actually photograph? What kind of stuff did you get involved in? What kind of events did you go to? What kind of personal stories did you learn about?
Yeah, so when I first ran into that parade for the first meeting of this group, I didn't have an understanding of how diverse this history was. It was something that I had to research a little bit, and so I started to learn more about that. And that history is deep. The contributions of African Americans being cowboys goes way back to even before the Civil War. But of course we know the history with the Buffalo Soldiers and the Civil War, and also settling the Western frontier. And so I started to learn those stories and that history, and of course tried to localize my project to what it's meant in the Mississippi Delta. And the easy way, or the obvious way to photograph it, would be to just go to a rodeo or just go to a horse show, which I've done over and over. But I've also gotten to know the people well enough where I'm able to go into their homes and figure out a little bit of who these people are off the horse, beyond the obvious, which I think has been really meaningful in terms of what I've been able to capture through the project. It's easy to identify a cowboy with hats and boots on, but a lot of the people in the photos are much more than just a cowboy. They're students, they work at the grocery store, they're retirees. And so what it means to be a cowboy in the Mississippi Delta might be a lot different than a ranch hand in Texas. But the common denominator with all these people is their love for the horses and for the people who associate with this. The history of black cowboys going back to the late 1800s was that nearly 1 in 4 cowboys were black. And so if you think about the contributions and the level of impact that they had, it's not portrayed as equally throughout that history. And so to know that there were that many people at the time who had a hand in developing the country, I think has been really valuable to learn, but also the cowboys and cowgirls in my project are aware of that. And it's something on a larger scale that I have heard all African American cowboys and cowgirls say, is that, you know, we've known this history is here. It just hasn't always been shared the way that it should be.
Did the culture sort of migrate from the plains in the Midwest and stuff to down south?
It's a great question. Unfortunately, we don't have a detailed, thorough archive of where this history started specific to where I live in the Mississippi Delta. What I've learned is that the project deals indirectly with the issues of civil rights history in Mississippi, or even black land ownership in Mississippi. And so what I've been able to find through oral history accounts is that we're talking about 50 years or so where this localized group of riders started, and then they've passed it down a couple of generations. And so there's a family in nearby Charleston, Mississippi, not far from where I live in Cleveland, and a lot of people have either ridden there for the first time or got their horse from there, went to one of the trail rides that started in Charleston, Mississippi, which geographically is important to know because it's where the flatness of the Mississippi Delta ends, and you start to see some hills and some elevation in the terrain, and so you can ride your horse on something other than just the flat Delta landscape. And so there is a bit of history that exists in Charleston because of, particularly of one family named the Smith family that started this and have maintained it throughout. And so the mother, who's now 91 years old, was her husband, who is deceased, kind of began this process, was one of the early farmers who had the land and the space to have horses. And of course, at that time, they were using them to work the land in a way that's much different than now, which has become much more social and recreational. The project has been life-changing, so nearly every time I'm out shooting, there's something really memorable going on in terms of accessing a community that it's there, but even locally, people are not extremely aware that it's there. And so when I'm out on a trail ride, which is sometimes 30, 40, 50 riders with their horses, I'm in a trailer ridden by one cowboy, on a tractor, and I'm there with my camera, and there's kids usually around me, so I'm the grown adult with all these kids around because I can't really ride easily and work the cameras as comfortably as I'd like to. So I'll be in the back in the trailer, and we're on these hills that are just out of the flatness, as I mentioned, in the Delta, and I stop and think, it's like I'm a world away from just the city setting, a small city of Cleveland, and here I am in the hills documenting a culture that can really go unnoticed. And what's funny is that I've gotten so close to these folks that even when I try to surprise them and gift them with prints or give them something in return, it's often right there that they're giving something back to me. And an example of that is one of the trail rides in Charleston. Again, I was sitting in the trailer. Well, the guy who was driving the tractor is also a self-taught folk artist, and so he paints these beautiful scenes of the land where he rides his horses and where the crops are grown. As I was about to give him a birthday present of a portrait that I took of his daughter and him, and I framed it up, printed it large, and I gave it to him, and he said, "I've got something for you." And granted, this was his birthday, so I was gifting him a present. Well, he turned around from his pickup truck and gave me a painting that he had done of me in the trailer from a year ago on a trail ride with all the kids around me, and there's me with my camera. And so it was kind of a magical exchange that, I thought I was going to surprise him, but he turned around and had something for me, which, it's moments like that, the connection and the interaction that we have, no matter what happens with the photos, I'll always have that. The older generation will tell you that when they were riding 20 years ago, there were way more people. And so it's really important for them to pass it down to the younger generation, but also help them understand the seriousness of what they're doing and continuing the traditions. So I'm very curious to see how the next generation will change and adapt, and if it will have a little bit of an uptick. That would be really nice to see, but also to document. And as long as I'm there, I think it's a lifelong project for me. I don't really see an end in sight. And then in terms of this project itself, instigating kind of a side project. And so once a year, my wife and I will try and visit a country that we've never been to before. And with the amount of time that I was spending with the cowboys in Mississippi, I thought, okay, well, let me explore, is there a cowboy or horse riding culture in these new countries or places that we're going to? And so I've started a working title project called Global Cowboys, where I explore, whether it's a Western traditional American cowboy or maybe using a horse for survival or for working the land or even for transportation. And so I've been able to do that in a number of countries, and I think that's something that I'll keep going long term as well.
Where have you gone so far?
Yeah, I've gone to a number of places. We shot it a little bit in Colombia. We explored Mexico, where my wife is from. There's a huge, particularly, she's in the state of Sonora, is where she grew up, and not far from Arizona. So there's a huge, almost like you're looking at American cowboys, the way they're dressed with their boots and hats. We've also looked at different states in the U.S. I looked along the Canada-Montana border up near Calgary. And one of the most interesting places where I explored this was in Cuba, actually. So Cuba has a big traditional Western-looking cowboy rodeo scene. And it's a couple of years ago we went there and went to a few rodeos, and we saw, interestingly enough, like they're actually using a lot of old American equipment because they don't have access to it. So you'll see chaps and hats and gloves and everything that's kind of embroidered with signs of American equipment, but also other countries as well, which is nice to see because there's this global support of people who are into the same passion. And of course in Cuba, a lot of people depend on them to work the land or to ride. So I learned by visiting there how much dependence they have.
Do you ever think of the possibility of doing a film on this?
Yeah, I mean, that would be amazing if you think about filming in each of these countries to capture the movement that's associated with this activity. And I think there's so many cultures around the world that have in some way or another, they have a connection to horses, which is fascinating in itself, particularly if you go back into all different time periods in history. I think it's also, by filming it would be a really good way to kind of connect people from all different parts of the world.
What's your takeaway from, what's doing this project done for you, do you think?
One, the project has been circulated in a way, a larger scale than any work that I've ever done before, and by receiving the ZEISS award, it's one more platform to be able to share the work, and that's really special on a personal level. But what I think is more significant is that people are learning about a little part of Mississippi history, which can then instigate learning about an even broader history of Black cowboy contributions. And to me that's really special, to see something happen as a result of simply walking into a parade, meeting a stranger and asking to come to your next event or to come see where you keep your horse. You really have no idea when you start a project like that and just jump right into it. But I think that it's really nice to be able to work on something where people can gain a better understanding of Mississippi, and then also beyond, when it's not always an equal level playing field for sharing stories in rural America.
Well, it's a beautiful project.
Congratulations
on the project as well as the award, and really look forward to seeing more.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it, Jim. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in. Join us next time for another edition of ZEISS Full Exposure. If you can't watch, you can always catch the audio-only version on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at ZEISS_full exposure or on the web at ZEISSfullexposure.com. And to learn more about the latest in ZEISS lenses, head to ZEISS.com.